Judaism is 3,000 years old. But what exactly is Judaism? Is it a religion, a nationality, a moral code, a culture? The answer is, it's all of the above, and it's none of the above. That's why many of us today prefer to think of Judaism as a peoplehood, Jews as a people. You see, the latest studies say that only 15% of American Jews today think of their Jewishness as a religion. The vast majority think of it as a culture or part of their ancestry. Because you can pray 3 times a day, or you can be an atheist, and you could still be Jewish. You could look like this. You could look like this. You could look like this or even this, and you could still be Jewish. You see, Jews are of a multiplicity of ethnicities, of backgrounds, of nationalities, of skin colors, of languages. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan said that you can be Jewish in one of 3 ways. You can be a Jew of believing, a Jew of behaving, or a Jew of belonging. Meaning you can believe what Jews believe, as opposed to, say, Christians or Hindus or Muslims in the Old Testament. Or you can behave certain ways. You can do Judaism. You can pray and eat and celebrate the Sabbath in a certain way. Or simply having been born of Jewish ancestry makes you a part of that group. Confused yet? Don't worry. Many Jews themselves are confused. And what makes it even more confusing, what makes it even more complicated, is that Judaism has evolved over the centuries. Jewish identity has evolved. And what I want to talk to you about today is how I believe that we are on the cusp of the next evolution of Jewish identity, what I call Judaism 4.0. But let me take you back. Let me take you back to Judaism 1.0. You see, our tradition tells us that the Israelites came down from Israel to Egypt because of a famine. And in Egypt, the Israelites became a huge nation. They were enslaved by Pharaoh. Moses came and freed the Jews, takes the Jews to the desert where they received the 10 Commandments from God at Mount Sinai. And then they wandered the desert for 40 years. And in that period of wandering, the Jewish people's holiness, sacredness went with them. They carried it with them. God went with them in a cloud of smoke in front of them. And they had a holy ark, the Mishkan, that went with them. And after 40 years, they finally make their way back to the promised land, to Israel. And that's when 2.0 happened. That's when the first evolution happened. So the Jewish people became more of a people with a place. And they built the temple. And it was at that temple that Judaism was defined. The priesthood would make animal sacrifices. Jews from all over would make pilgrimage to the temple. But then that temple was destroyed, a second temple was built, and then that second temple was destroyed. And the Jewish people were exiled. They were dispersed. And Judaism had to find a way to survive with no temple. And that was the evolution to Judaism 3.0. From the temple came the synagogue. From the priests became the rabbis. From animal sacrifice, we saw prayer. And the Jewish people developed a system of law called the halakha. And that became the central part of Jewish culture. And for the last 2,000 years, this is pretty much the Judaism that we've practiced today. Up until the last couple hundred years, roughly when the Enlightenment started to take hold, and the secularization of Europe led Jews to think of their identity as something separate from their religious faith. And Jewish people started becoming involved in philosophical society and creative society and the sciences. And I believe that that evolution that's happened over the last couple hundred years is coming to a head right now. We're in a moment when we're on the cusp of a religious evolution, if not a religious revolution. Why? Because of 5 factors that are creating the perfect storm. Factor number 1, dropping institutional affiliation. Less than 1/3 of American Jews are members of synagogues. But that doesn't mean that Jews aren't doing Judaism. They are. Young people are finding their Jewish connection on the hiking trail with Wilderness Torah. They're finding it in urban gardening with Urban Adamah. They're finding it in connecting to each other outside of college through Moishe House. They're finding it through study ancient texts on the internet. So they're still doing Jewish, they're just not doing it in the old way. Number 2, shifting ethnographics. What I mean by that is that people used to define themselves by their Jewish parents or their Jewish grandparents. But right now, conversion is being flipped on its head. People are saying, I can still do or be Jewish without even having converted officially. And they don't look the same way as they do. I have a Japanese friend, a woman who didn't convert to Judaism, married a Jewish guy, and she's the one who takes the kids to Hebrew school. She's the one who makes challah for Friday night Shabbat dinner. She's the one who prepares the Passover Seder. You tell me, who's Jewish in that home? Factor number 3. For the first time in Jewish history, there's both a strong Jewish homeland in Israel and a strong center in the Jewish diaspora here in North America. It's never been like that before. There's been one or the other. But today we have these 2 strong centers of Jewish life making contributions to the Jewish future. And we have to find a way to bridge these 2 centers. We have to find a way to get beyond our differences. And that's contributing to the need to evolve. Factor number 4, broadened ways that people are finding meaning and belonging in their lives. No longer are people only finding their sense of meaning and belonging in the church or the synagogue or the mosque. They're finding it in their book club, in their study group, in their cycling group, in their yoga group, in their Burning Man experience. People are finding their sense of meaning and their micro-community in different ways. And again, that's a great thing, but it challenges the old ways of doing old religion. And not just Judaism, I would make the case. And finally, the 5th factor, advances in science and technology. Science and technology are taking us in places that we don't even know where they're going. Imagine being able to put on virtual reality goggles and stand at the base of Mount Sinai for a revelation. Imagine that it's not so far off that we'll be able to eat kosher bacon because the rabbis have said, well, it's from cloned pig cells, so it's kosher. Imagine being able to drive around in autonomous vehicles on a Friday night and a Saturday without breaking the rules of the Sabbath, because you're not driving, you're being driven. Imagine being able to study the sacred texts that are thousands of years old that are now online and interconnected and not needing to sit across from a rabbi. These 5 factors are leading to what we would call a crash, a sociological crash. Rabbi B'nai Lappe talks about how when there's a crash, it's because your system of views, your worldview is being challenged by a bunch of outside factors. And one of 3 things can happen. When your worldview is challenged, you can either double down, you can block out the outside world, you can become even more ingrained and say, well, we're not exposing you to television or the internet. That's a legitimate response. The second response is people walk away. They walk away from the old way. They're shown a new way and say, whoa, this whole thing's been flipped on its head and I don't believe it anymore. Or the third way is that people innovate. They try to combine the old and the new. And that's what's exciting. That's what brings us to Judaism 4.0, is trying to find a way for those not in category 1 to still make meaning out of their Jewishness, so it's still relevant. You know, a couple hundred years ago, if you were Jewish, it defined everything about you. It defined how you dressed, where you lived, how you ate, who you married, what you did for a living. Today, if you're Jewish, it might be one piece of your identity. You might be a student, you might be a soccer player, you might be a dancer, you might be a teacher, you might be a lawyer, you might be a mother, you might be a soldier, and somewhere in there you might also be Jewish. But how is that going to become a part of your identity unless you choose for it to be a part of your identity? You have to make the active choice of doing as opposed to just being. Yehuda Kurtzer of the Shalom Hartman Institute talks about how we are all now today Jews of choice. That's the term that we used to use for Jews who converted to Judaism, a Jew of choice. But today, we all have to choose to make that an important part of our identity. I want to end with a story that takes us back to the last evolution in Judaism from our last operating system to 3.0. I want to take you to the year 70 CE, 70 years after Jesus was born. The Romans are sacking Jerusalem. I mean leveling it, destroying it, burning it down. And the Jews in Jerusalem who are defending the old city have said, we're going to fight to the death. No one is leaving these old city walls unless you're in a coffin. This was a fight to the end. And there was one man named Yochanan ben Zakkai who realized that if all the Jews were killed, that could be the end of Judaism, the end of all these traditions. And he realized he had to get out of the old city so he could save Judaism. And he came up with a plan to fake his own death. He had his students build him a coffin, and they snuck him out of the old city of Jerusalem in a coffin, and they brought him to the tent of the Roman general, Vespasian. And when they dropped the coffin in front of Vespasian, and Yochanan ben Zakkai popped out, and he hailed Vespasian as Caesar. And Vespasian was taken aback, and he said, I'm not Caesar, there's a Caesar in Rome. And at that very moment, a messenger came into the tent and said Caesar had been killed, and he was the new Caesar. Well, Vespasian was totally blown away by this prophecy, and he turns to Ben Zakkai and he says, I'll grant you a wish. What do you want? It's almost like out of a Disney movie, right? He doesn't ask for power or wealth or riches. He simply asked to run this small school in a town called Yavna. The famous quote is that Ben Zakkai said, give me Yavna and its sages. And Vespasian did. And it was at that school that the next level of Judaism was born. That Judaism 3.0 was born. That diaspora Judaism was born. Because how could you have a Jewish life if there was no temple? How could you have a Jewish life with no animal sacrifice, no priesthood? They had to come up with a new way to do Jewish because the old way would no longer work. That's pretty much the Judaism we've been doing for the last 2,000 years. Now, what's the Judaism going to look like for the next 2,000 years? I'm not sure, but I'm excited to find out. Thank you very much.